Wait, Riddick! Whoa, whoa, whoa!
No time like the present, Johns.
I got him, Riddick! I got him!
Good effort. Bad result.
He's here! He's got a weapon!
Since I was a kid, I've always loved sci-fi. I can't exactly explain why, but I just love sci-fi stuff. Star Wars was one of my favorite things as a kid. Halo was my favorite game series. Dead Space, Mass Effect were some of my favorite games. You get the idea. Movies, TV series, and especially video games. I even liked some of the Stargate stuff. Yet somehow, the Riddick series managed to elude me. I was aware of the movies and the games, but they were never really on my radar. Probably because I had other things going on that I was more interested in. It's not because I heard Riddick was bad. I mean, I did hear that, but that's not why I wasn't interested. It just never really appeared in my life. Well, recently, I've been looking at the concepts around multimedia and franchises. There are plenty of movies that have video game adaptations, and video games that have movie adaptations. Tie-ins, however, seem to be far more rare. I have seen some pretty impressive attempts at big multimedia projects though, one of those being Shadows of the Empire, which I've already covered on this channel. But overall, these kinds of attempts seem to be really rare, and almost never manage to maintain continuity across platforms. For some reason, when it comes to keeping canon and working in unison to create and contribute to a larger universe, there is a shockingly low interest in such an endeavor on the part of major investors. Sure, every studio is champing at the bit to get their own connected movie universe and cash in on that Marvel money, but that's where it ends. Movies. Even the best adaptations seem to disregard their own inspirations. Rather than contribute to a larger universe, they choose to recreate their source material in order to cash in on the brand name without having to put in the work of maintaining a larger canon and abide by someone else's creation. The Castlevania Netflix series, for instance, chooses to overwrite the events of the games, acting as its own interpretation as opposed to a true adaptation or tie-in. This is the case in most franchises. The Uncharted movie also comes to mind, or any live-action Resident Evil adaptation. Take your pick, there's 3 different versions, all of which are terrible. This brings me to the CGI Resident Evil movies, which choose to contribute to the main continuity of the series rather than a useless, standalone, unrelated product just using the logo. Kind of. Their canonicity is debatable, but they seem to at least try. So, what does any of this have to do with the Riddick series? Well, the most interesting thing to me about the Riddick series is that, although weird, campy, inconsistent, and schlocky, it's unified. Well, mostly. All 3 movies are continuations of each other in terms of narrative, although not so much in tone. The part that interested me, though, is that the games are also supposedly entirely canon to the movie's universe, which means that in order to get the full Riddick story, you have to watch all 3 movies and play both games since they all tie into each other. Now, I will say that they don't do so in like an MCU type of way. Like, you literally do not have to play the games to understand anything about the movies or vice versa. But they are canon to one another. Well, for the most part, but I'll talk about that later. And a big part of this, I think, is our lead actor, Vin Diesel, is not only a known video gamer, but he literally just keeps pushing for this universe because he has so much fun with it. He likes playing this character in this sci-fi universe. And if you've been following this channel for very long, you'll know the most compelling products to me are the ones made by the people who just really wanted to make them. Studios are not and have not pushed for this series, like at all. There aren't execs making calls trying to convince Diesel to come back for more installments. These movies have never performed very well. Rather, he's pushing for them, which is why he features his voice in both games and why he's in all the movies. Normally, when a game studio manages to get a movie actor to offer their voice for a video game adaptation, the lines feel phoned in and lazy. The actor clearly doesn't care to be there and isn't taking it seriously. It's just a payday to them. Vin Diesel, however, loves playing this character, and so his performance in the games feels about on par with in the movies. Now, You can say what you will about that being because he's not a great actor or because he is a great actor. That's not the point. Vin Diesel loves this franchise and brought the same intensity to every installment of it, which is pretty obvious why. Riddick is without a doubt a self-insert power fantasy character, which normally I'm not a fan of, but for some reason I find it so endearing in these movies. Vin Diesel is clearly just having so much fun. I can't help but enjoy watching it. Not to mention how much it helps make Riddick a perfect video game protagonist given the self-insert power fantasy nature of the character. I really haven't seen a multimedia franchise hold on to its own consistent universe so well across multiple platforms like this. That's not to say that there haven't been examples of that, but I just appreciate it so much that when I was looking into going through this franchise, I saw a lot of what I'd have to do would be in the same universe and continuity. I love this about it. However, this has come at a cost. There has admittedly been some retconning throughout the franchise's existence, but that retconning has been mild, and most fans have constructed fan theory headcanons to preserve the continuity, but I'll address those as we get to them. There are a few things that make the happenings in the games questionable, but we do get direct mentions of things from the games in the movies, which is really cool. So next up, I'm going to provide a brief summary of each installment, followed by my thoughts on that installment. This will include 3 live-action movies, 1 animated short film, 2 motion comics, and 3 video games. There are also novelizations of the first 2 movies, but I'm not reading or talking about those since they're just the same stories as the movies, but probably expanded on. These things make up the entirety of the Chronicles of Riddick universe as it exists today. To make things easier, let's do it all in chronological order. Our introduction to this world chronologically is the Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay.
We're moving again. They just transmitted a safe route through the minefield.
That minefield's offering better odds than you're gonna get taking me to Butcher Bay. You think Hoxie's memory is that short?
He gets one look at you, Riddick, and all is forgiven. And I bank your bounty plus 50.
Plus 50? Now come on, Johns. Greed is an ugly thing.
You're in no position to negotiate, Riddick.
We're landing at Butcher Bay in an hour. Buckle up. Turbulence from an incoming sandstorm is expected. Hang on till we're through it.
Oh yeah, I forgot you don't like this part. Statistically, landings are the most dangerous.
You got nothing left to live for, Riddick. I do. Now shut up, would you?
You're already counting it, aren't you?
I said shut up.
Your funeral.
Actually playing this game was sort of an unexpected process. I had to do some research to find the best way to play it, be that emulation, a genuine copy, PC, Xbox, or whatever. What I found is that neither game can be emulated in a way that makes them playable, and both this one and its sequel are not available for digital purchase on any of the major platforms, despite a clear and immense amount of work having gone into both games, even as far as this one getting a total remake and re-release alongside its sequel, Assault on Dark Athena. You can't buy them digitally on any online store. It's not really clear who owns the rights to these games right now, and so they've just become abandonware, which means that not only is downloading them for free on your PC and just playing them totally moral and legal, it's also incredibly easy. And if I might be so bold to say, you should do that right now, because Escape from Butcher Bay has everything I want out of a video game. Like, in general, this game is like the definition of a hidden gem, an underrated masterpiece. I cannot believe this game is not praised way more than it is. If you're watching this right now and wishing you could find an older Xbox game sporting an edgy sci-fi aesthetic with unique and satisfying gameplay, then don't wait any longer. Here it is. It's insane that this is a tie-in to a B-list Hollywood action movie and yet is significantly better than the movie it's tying into, because I have really loved my experience with this game, and playing it actually made me really bitter towards a lot of newer games I've been playing because it made me realize how lame and boring they are. I was in the middle of writing for a newer game I've been playing when I started playing this, and it just amplified my resentment for how utterly safe and lame newer games seem to have become in comparison to titles like these. Playing Escape from Butcher Bay is like playing a game with similar melee combat to the Condemned games, a handful of immersive sim elements from the Deus Ex games, the graphics and lighting of Doom 3, and a watered-down version of the stealth from Thief. It's none of those games, but it's a little bit of all of them. Starbreeze Studios is most known for their video game adaptation of the Darkness comic books into the popular cult classic game for the Xbox 360. And there are a lot of elements of this game in the first Darkness, which would come out a few years later, mostly to do with the mechanics. The game's story is both simple, but also perfect for what it is. It's the tale of Riddick's escape from the prison, Butcher Bay. The whole Riddick universe is sort of a grimdark future where prisons are all over the galaxy and constantly trying to get more inmates to continue expansion and growth. Pretty much anything to do with this universe has a prison, bounty hunters, and mercenaries somewhere in it. There are some subplot threads that tie into later movies, like Riddick getting his sight ability by communicating with another Furion telepathically, and of course his dynamic with the bounty hunter Johns, who's played by the same guy who played him in the movie Pitch Black, which is awesome. There's a few other celebs in this game too, like Ron Perlman, Michael Rooker, and for some reason, Exhibit, who does a fantastic job at the over-the-top and hateable Abbott.
Hey, Abbott. When you drop that fish into his new tank, we gotta talk. Stop the Achilles.
Don't worry, I got bust by the balls. You get your share, Cyrus.
And of course you've got Vin Diesel, who embodies the main character, but he did way more than that. Diesel was reportedly heavily involved with the team regarding the portrayal of the character, going so far as to help the team cut dozens of lines from the game and help rewrite dozens more simply because Diesel felt that they were having Riddick talk too much, an idea that would age very well among the gaming community. He also, along with the director of the Chronicles of Riddick, David Twohy, had several phone calls and voice messages with the team to advise them on story and narrative details. As much as I do like the combat for this game though, it's got some pretty janky issues. Because of how it works, Riddick will punch in the direction you're holding the analog stick, which works great for the fisticuffs hand-to-hand combat, but it does not translate well to the shiv combat. Because this is a prison, shivs are a common thing, and bladed combat is something the player will have to do fairly often. Only problem is, it's kinda bad. Trying to know which direction to strike to bypass my opponent's guard feels like a guessing game, and often gets me killed. For a while, I thought there were tells, like the game would show me where the enemy was blocking so I knew where to aim my strike. This may even be a function of the game and I just didn't recognize it, but as far as I could tell, there are no clear signs of where the enemy is blocking. I would always try and see if I could tell from his stance or arms, but it still ended up just becoming a guessing game of strikes and blocks. For some reason, this worked way better for the fist combat than it did for the shiv combat. The stealth works. That's about the best thing I can say. You can sneak up and execute guards, hide their bodies, and move in darkness to stay out of sight. It's not fancy, but it functions. And that's enough for me to enjoy it, because this isn't exclusively a stealth game. You'll only be doing stealth sometimes. If it was a stealth game, this would feel a little bare bones, but you'll get to spend plenty of your time shooting and beating things to death as well. Where this game really impressed me is with its RPG elements. Now note I said elements. This is not an RPG, but there are some side quests to take, interesting characters to interact with and get to know, and a lot of learning and backtracking through areas in the prison you have to familiarize yourself with. This is not just a series of linear levels to shoot your way through, but we do get some of those too. The game has two main hub areas where you'll be doing more exploring and interacting than fighting and killing. There is a third hub area, but the time you spend there is significantly shorter than the other two, so I don't really count it. Between these hubs, you'll get more traditional gameplay levels with lots of gun combat, stealth, etc. While there are other games like this, there aren't many. It feels very unique and immersive. Like I said, it's not quite an immersive sim, but sometimes it gets close. That, I think, is ultimately the big strength of Escape from Butcher Bay. It's a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none type of situation. It's not a shooter, stealth game, RPG, or immersive sim, but it's got elements of all of those things that seem to mesh very well together into a fantastic gaming experience. Like I said, I could probably talk about this game for significantly longer than I will in this video, and I am considering doing a full review video. But seriously, if you're anything like me and you like to go back and experience or re-experience older games, put this one near the top of your list. It's really great, and if you're the type of person wondering about those great games you missed out on back in the older console days, this is one of them. There are a few downsides, the biggest of which is the insane bloom they put on everything. I can't turn it off in the settings, and it frequently makes it hard to see anything. Several times I even considered trying to mod it out, but I wanted to keep it to the experience I would end up recommending to the easiest acquisition, so I just kept it default. Now, from what I understand, this is mainly a problem with the remake and doesn't affect the original Xbox version. So if you're going through an Xbox phase and looking for some good throwback titles, that's probably the move. I don't see that this remake has any advantage past a slight graphics touch-up. They call it a remake in the marketing, but I'm pretty sure this is the same game as the original with touch-ups and polish. Too much polish, ironically. Even so, everything I researched suggested that this remake is just as good of a way to experience Escape from Butcher Bay as the original, as they're incredibly similar to one another.
It's a sudden stop at the bottom.
Well, chronologically, we're off to a really great start, I think. Let's see what else this grimdark sci-fi universe has in store for us. Technically speaking, this is the original piece of Riddick media. It was released before Pitch Black and takes place chronologically during the same time that Butcher Bay was supposed to be happening. Pitch Black Slam City is an internet browser motion comic that was supposed to act as a prelude into the first movie back in the year 2000. The interesting thing about this comic, however, is that it's not at all canon. It was released as promo material for the original movie long before anyone had a bigger idea for the franchise beyond a one-off sci-fi horror movie. We're talking early days of the internet when VH1 and MTV were popping off and getting VHS tapes at Blockbuster was the weekend move. And since it has no voice acting, it's just the panels of a comic moving with some ambience and sound effects. I'd be willing to bet 9 out of every 10 people you'll ever meet in your life aren't even aware that this exists. I didn't even know it until I did research for this video. Shout out to YT Channel Anime for preserving this little non-canon gem. The motion comic depicts Riddick being moved to a floating space prison called Slam City before managing to break free from his bindings and move through Slam City to escape. It's short but sweet. The thing that made them have to decanonize this motion comic is that it shows Riddick getting what is referred to as an eye shining by a surgeon. This is due to a line in the movie it's tied to about why Riddick's eyes glow and why he can see in the dark, which had to be decanonized after the sequel released, which we'll get into later. Escape from Butcher Bay effectively replaced this motion comic with a far more interesting and compelling prelude into Pitch Black, so while it is short and I did enjoy watching it, this is one of the pieces of the Riddick universe that has no real bearing on the rest of the series. Although Johns from the first movie does make an appearance in the end of the comic, which is a pretty cool callback. Again, Escape from Butcher Bay is a complete replacement for this motion comic, so its only real purpose is a novelty at best. Now we have arrived at our first live-action movie, Pitch Black. The original kickoff of the Riddick universe. Although the franchise itself later became a bit more space operatic, its origins here are that of a sci-fi horror flick, not too dissimilar to the likes of Event Horizon or Alien. As mentioned several times in this video already, Pitch Black is a pretty standard fare sci-fi horror movie. It was released in the year 2000, which gives it a super interesting vibe if you are aware of it. It feels exactly like a movie from the late 90s, with a touch of that early 2000s over-stylized action scattered throughout. I'm a sucker for these kinds of movies, and this is absolutely a relic of its time. I'm showing gameplay footage here because I want to show minimal movie footage to avoid copyright. Let's just say Hollywood is way more whiny about copyright on YouTube than most people might realize. The plot is simple. Riddick is a dangerous prisoner being transported along with a handful of other passengers to another planet when a meteor shower damages their ship and awakens them from cryosleep early. They crash land on a planet with 2 suns that never seem to set, which causes seemingly unending daylight. Riddick then breaks free from his bindings and escapes to hide among the wreckage. There's a decent period of the movie where we think Riddick might be the danger here, as Johns and the survivors hunt him, but quickly we're shown that isn't the case. The dynamic changes when someone gets eaten by something they can't really see hiding in a cave. Turns out it was one of the planet's local fauna, carnivorous aliens that cannot go into the light and must survive in the dark caverns of the planet. Which, you can guess, suggests problems when they find out that the planet has a routine eclipse that allows the terrifying creatures to fly freely on the surface to hunt. This builds tension as the crew tries to hole up in an abandoned research station and wait the eclipse out, except that's not an option, and there isn't enough supplies to last until the long eclipse is over. Working as a team, the crew attempts to move across the planet during the dark, using their light sources as a way to navigate and keep the creatures at bay. Of course, this goes horribly wrong, causing most of them to die, and the 3 that survive barely make it off the planet. One thing that really surprised me is that our female lead dies. I expected her to make it off the planet, but no, she's eaten alive, despite the movie centering around her, not Riddick. What's worse is that she died in an attempt to rescue the Islamic holy man and a young girl calling herself Jack. Riddick was about to take the shuttle and leave, but she talks him into going back to save the other 2 survivors hiding in a cave nearby. This ends up getting her killed, but it does offer Riddick a little bit of a redemption. He's a hardened prisoner at this point, but this little arc revealed there was still something of a person left inside him. The aggressive tension between Johns and Riddick is admittedly fun to watch. The fight scenes are brutal and satisfying, although sparse, and the horror and gore is on full display here. The characters are what you would expect, sort of archetypey, and pretty much all of them die. It's really cool to watch Riddick and Johns square off here too, especially if you've played the games and understand the tension here a little better. Keith David is among the cast, which I always just call him the Arbiter from Halo, which in my book always makes a movie worth looking at because Keith David. Genuinely, this was just a really fun movie, and worth rewatching every now and again for fans of horror or science fiction. The movie is of a higher caliber than a lot of other sci-fi movies, and I think it holds up really well being over 20 years old. Its characters are unique, action is fun, and its pacing is great. On the other hand, the campy premise, silly execution, way over-the-top dialogue, and dated CGI solidify this movie on the B-list. Overall, I can recommend checking it out, but just recognize what you're in for. Now this is something else. Man, I really miss when studios used to greenlight experimental animated movies to help expand on stories and universes. Films like Dante's Inferno, Dead Space Downfall and Aftermath, The Animatrix. Little animated films that can be watched for extra content and substance. It was always a little uncommon, but now it's just outright unseen. Which made me interested in the Chronicles of Riddick Dark Fury, if only on that concept alone. Speaking of The Animatrix, by the way, this little animated movie is by the same director. Let me just say this. I'm covering these in chronological order, but I didn't watch them that way. I watched the first and second movie first, then the animated one, and I can confidently say I was shocked. Dark Fury is a far better sequel to Pitch Black than the actual sequel was. If the live-action sequel had literally just been this movie's story and execution, but in live action, people would have loved it far more, I can guarantee it. This is a genuine animated sci-fi epic, dripping with horror elements. The animation, sound design, music, voice acting, and pacing is all brilliant. Honestly, Dark Fury is arguably the best piece of non-video game Riddick media available, and 100% worth watching for anyone who's even remotely into sci-fi or horror, especially in the animated variety. And it's only half an hour. The plot is simple but satisfying. It takes place between the first and second movie, where after making their escape from the planet in the first movie, Riddick, Jack, and Iman are captured in a tractor beam by a giant space vessel. The owner of this ship is a very wealthy woman who has made a hobby out of tracking down the most savage killers in the galaxy and placing them in an indefinite state of suspended animation, and then putting them on pedestals, referring to them as art. After capturing Riddick, her plan is to watch him kill some things to appreciate his capability, and then make him join her other pieces as art, by placing him into the same suspended animation. Riddick then has to rescue Jack and Iman and escape the ship to avoid getting killed. All the while, there are multiple other bounty hunters hunting him across the ship, and also an alien decked out in mech armor trying to eat him, looking like an unused character from Doom 3. Riddick, of course, has to kill it, but it's so much fun to watch. It's got a better plot than the second movie, a significantly more interesting and well-written villain than the second movie, better action scenes than the second movie, and is a better sequel than the second movie. In fact, this was easily the best Riddick movie out of all of them. Well animated, well executed, well written. A compelling villain matched up with such an interesting story makes this the highest quality Riddick movie yet.
Awfully uncivilized thing you just did there, Jack.
Which brings us to the actual sequel to Pitch Black, The Chronicles of Riddick. This is a difficult one to talk about. I'll go ahead and be upfront. This movie sucks. It's really not a good movie, and might be the worst thing this universe has to offer. Well, the worst official thing anyway, but I'll get to that. That being said, I also really liked it, because again, it's just so obvious everyone involved was having so much fun with it. Unfortunately, this movie is where the entire franchise just entirely course corrects for no reason in a worse direction. Until now, this franchise had been a dark sci-fi universe with strong horror themes. This movie, however, is unabashed space opera schlock. Riddick's character has been totally retconned from a dangerous criminal into a prophesized chosen one storyline out of literally nowhere. Yes, if you factor in Escape from Butcher Bay, then it's a little more natural, but that game was developed alongside this movie. It's so clear that this was not the direction the first movie had in mind. If Pitch Black had strong Aliens vibes, then this movie has strong Lynch's Doom vibes. And I really mean that. It feels like some executives at the Sci-Fi Channel said, we need our own Dune, and then they talked the writer of Pitch Black into revisiting his universe with that in mind. Although that isn't what happened, the Sci-Fi Channel will come into this whole thing later, so keep them in mind. One of the biggest retcons in the franchise happens to make way for this new space opera narrative. A defining trait of Riddick's character in Pitch Black was his eyes, and how he could see in the dark. Now, in the original movie, this was explained as a sci-fi cyberpunk augmentation given to him by a doctor that altered his eyes with what's called an eye shining. We even saw how that happened in the prequel motion comic. Like we covered earlier, however, they totally decanonized the Slam City story, depicting that occurring and explained away Riddick's explanation as a simple lie, or a misunderstanding. It's not very clear. But to be fair, this does tie in just fine with Escape from Butcher Bay, because that game was being developed with this new story direction for the franchise in mind. The game shows us his ties to the Furion race teased throughout the game in little bits. We even see him getting stitched up by a doctor when he gets his so-called eye shining. But it still doesn't match up with his explanation from the first movie. As for the second movie, it features some seriously good acting talent that isn't acting very talented. Karl Urban plays an ambitious alien warrior as part of this strange cultist religion that literally worships death. I mean, they're called the Necromongers, which to call that on the nose wouldn't do justice to just how obvious that name is. We also see Keith David reprising his role as Iman from the first movie, serving to help tie the two films together, since going straight from one to the other might give you whiplash otherwise. Unfortunately, he dies in the first act though. Judi Dench plays a pretty crucial role here too as a Furion, a member of the race from which Riddick is from with similar powers to him. Oh yeah, he's got alien powers now. There's just nothing they could do to save this script though. It's really terrible. Even though their acting is decent, the words they say are just silly more than half the time. Most of the effects have aged poorly, and despite having some good actors in this movie, their performances are all pretty middling. There's this subplot going on the whole time about Carl Urban's character wanting to kill their leader and take his place, but being too scared to do so. And Jada Pinkett Smith just plays herself antagonizing her poor husband the whole time, and manipulating him because she's awful. I didn't love this, and it just draws the movie out while contributing nothing. No, really, this subplot could be totally taken out and it wouldn't really matter or affect the main plot at all. So with that in mind, why did I say I really like this movie? Well, because as I've gotten older, I've just accepted my nature and embraced who I am. I don't care if something is objectively good. I care if it's subjectively cool to me. I want my media to be badass. I want it to be action-packed, and at times maybe so over the top that it's stupid. The Chronicles of Riddick is oftentimes pretty badass. His character is an amateurishly written, overpowered Gary Stu, but I don't care because I can really respect how Vin Diesel got super jacked for the part and plays it with so much fun that I can't help but have as much fun watching him do these ridiculous things as he seems to be having doing them. The film's whole second act takes place on a prison world called Crematoria. Again, on the nose, where the planet is so hot that it will melt the skin off anyone it touches when it rises. So there's a whole scene where Riddick and a group of prisoners are literally trying to outrun the sunrise to avoid being burnt alive. This part is so ridiculous it would hurt if it wasn't so cool to watch, which it is. The prison sequence that precedes that is also really cool. Riddick reuniting with Jack was a fun subplot, and the choreography made for a great fight sequence, though her recasting is pretty unfortunate, and I read that Vin Diesel tried really hard to convince the studio to bring the original actress back for this movie. They apparently didn't have confidence in her ability to perform the stunts needed for the part, so they brought in Alexa Davalos to take over the role of Jack, who reveals her real name is Kira, with a Y. The original actress, Rihanna Griffith, did get to reprise her role as Jack in the animated movie we talked about before, Dark Fury, which ended up being one of her last roles before retiring from acting to pursue her career in art and eventually settle down with her family. And of course, because this is a Riddick movie, we have an act of it dedicated to Riddick being put in prison by a group of mercenaries who are then killed. It's weird. I feel like the best parts of this movie are the ones that have nothing to do with the main plot and story it's trying to tell. The whole necromonger plot is just really bad, and as much fun as I have with its campiness, I feel like this could have been a better movie if they just weren't in it, and we just focused on Riddick being hunted, imprisoned on Crematoria, and eventually escaping. More in line with the other entries in the franchise. Overall, it's probably worth watching once, but just recognize that it's stupid, it's not trying to be smart, it's trying to be cool, and as far as I'm concerned, it is.
I'll kill you with my teacup.
The placement of this one is so strange. Dark Athena chronologically takes place between Butcher Bay and Pitch Black, but it came out in 2009, roughly 5 years after the second movie came out, and it's filling a gap that didn't really need to be filled in my opinion. I really wasn't interested in what happened between Butcher Bay and Pitch Black, but oh well, here we are. I know it's a little inconsistent to cover this here instead of right after Butcher Bay when it takes place, but I wanted to spread the game coverage out a little bit. I don't have to tell you again that I loved Escape from Butcher Bay, so going into this one, I was hoping for another piece of Starbreeze gold to relish in. If they gave me more of what I got last time with improvements, then I'd be more than happy. However, I'd only ever heard good things about Butcher Bay. So I won't lie, the fear that this one was never mentioned because it was bad began to rise as I launched the game. I'll tell you, I am thrilled to report that Assault on Dark Athena is still fantastic. I would not say it's as good as Escape from Butcher Bay though. They really shaved the immersive sim and RPG aspects, what little of them there were, down to nearly nothing. Aside from the rare side quest or two and one section that has a minor sort of hub and some dialogue interactions, you'll be spending most of your time with this game in a more linear stealth and shoot 'em up fashion. Mechanically, it plays exactly like Escape from Butcher Bay. I didn't notice any major improvements or changes, but that might be because the version of Butcher Bay I played was the remake that comes with Assault on Dark Athena, so I can't rightly attest to its improvements over the original Xbox port. You can now grab a drone and use the weapon attached to its body while holding it like a human shield, or rather an android shield I guess, which is a really cool addition. Even cooler is when you get to pilot these drones. There are 2 sections in the game where this occurs, and both are accompanied by a really fantastic track from Gustav Grefberg.
Be advised that destruction of the vessel may cause you harm. Use with caution.
Dark Athena is pretty much a blend of stealth game and FPS action, significantly more straightforward than its predecessor. There is a very good reason why it's so similar to the Escape from Butcher Bay remake. Like I said earlier, Assault on Dark Athena is set right after Escape from Butcher Bay, but still before Pitch Black. An odd choice in my opinion, because I feel like setting it after the second movie and figuring out a way to factor in the Necromongers as an enemy made way more sense. I know I didn't like their inclusion in the movie, but they seem like they would make a fantastic enemy faction for a video game. The story isn't anything crazy, but it's perfect for the game it's for. After escaping Butcher Bay, Riddick's ship gets picked up by a massive mercenary vessel who are hoping to make some money from what's on board. Riddick narrowly avoids being captured by the Mercs, but does sneak onto the Dark Athena and has to find a way off. It's tense and a very fun stealth experience. Sci-fi fans like myself have a lot to love here, as the dev team poured their time into making the Dark Athena have a very oppressive atmosphere. While on the ship, Riddick heads up having to work with some of the prisoners being stored there, and eventually has to go head-to-head with Rivas, the woman who runs the Dark Athena, and the main villain of the game. About halfway through the game, we end up escaping the ship by hijacking an escape pod. But unfortunately, we get shot down and crash land on a nearby planet, which leads to some of the best visuals across both games as we descend into the heart of a massive abandoned factory before entering an old mining village. By this point, stealth is mostly gone as we've entered the FPS segment of the game, but it's very decent gunplay, so it's fine. Pretty quick, Riddick sees that the Dark Athena has docked on the other side of the city he's in for refueling and repairs, and decides he needs to get back on board that vessel to escape. It's shorter than the first game, with a lot more shooting sections and a lot less of everything else. So I looked into it and discovered that the reason this happened is because Assault on Dark Athena wasn't supposed to be a full game, or really its own game at all. It was pitched as a bonus level to take place after the end of Escape from Butcher Bay to add an extra hour or 2 of content for their Escape from Butcher Bay remake. Essentially what happened though was that the game's publisher Vivendi Games merged with Activision, and both development and funding for Assault on Dark Athena, which was at the time a Butcher Bay remake, along with 8 other games that Vivendi was set to publish, was dropped outright. So while Starbreeze searched and pitched their game to publishers, they generated enough content to justify calling Assault on Dark Athena its own game and a genuine sequel to the first title. Pretty shortly thereafter, Atari picked up the rights to publish the game, and the full sequel, along with a total remake of the original, launched in April 2009. It received great reviews, but I couldn't find much information about the game's sales numbers, or really much information about these games at all. For some reason, both of these games flew utterly under everyone's radar, including mine, for years. Which sucks, because these are 2 of my favorite games that I've played in a long while. Fact is, the movies are all mediocre and ridiculous, and I'm afraid that might have hurt the reputation of the games because these are some really stellar standout titles. If you like Dishonored, The Darkness, Hitman, Thief, and other pseudo-MSIM games, then you'll probably at least enjoy these games. So I really recommend at least trying them out, because not only are they free abandonware on PC, but they're really good, and putting both games together will only take you about 15 hours to complete.
In the end, everybody bleeds the same.
The next 3 entries on our list are all tied to and include the third movie of the franchise, and all released in 2013. This starts with Riddick Blindsided, the second motion comic of the franchise, taking place between the second and third film. Well, sort of. A lot of the events shown in the motion comic are actually in the movie, but they're only in the director's cut for some reason. So this motion comic acts as more of a substitute for removed footage if you've only seen the theatrical cut, which cuts over 8 minutes of footage. I still think it's cool that they did this. The animation is very interesting and neat too. I know I've said this multiple times, but it's really a shame more movies don't do stuff like this anymore. The whole thing is only about 5 minutes long and just depicts Riddick as Emperor of the Necromongers before an assassination attempt happens against him, which he clarifies is not the first. He pieces together that they do not want him there, and he agrees with them that he also isn't crazy about the soft lifestyle he's ended up adopting. So to the delight of Karl Urban's character, Riddick leaves their empire and moves on somewhere else, which leads us straight to the third film, Riddick. But before we get to that, we have one more game to look at. Released roughly 2 weeks after the movie it's tying into, Riddick the Merc Files is a top-down stealth video game developed for Android and iOS operating systems. The team that made the game actually features several members of the original Starbreeze staff who worked on the first 2 games, which Vin Diesel himself apparently went out of his way to make happen. It's interesting. The whole thing can be beaten in roughly 15 to 20 minutes, and it's unclear where the game takes place in the overarching story. We know Riddick is hiding out in a location simply referred to as the Dunes. It's a sandy planet, and I'm not sure if this is the same one we saw in the third live-action movie or not, though it sort of resembles it. Taking a shot in the dark, pun intended, I'd say this takes place sometime before the third movie, but it's not that important as the game itself doesn't feature a story beyond the little opening cutscene. We know some mercs showed up, and Riddick has to stay in the shadows to avoid being spotted as he takes down the mercs and completes a small variety of other side objectives with each mission. The game features 16 stages and received support for just short of a year, with 8 updates releasing over the span of 11 months. The game is now basically impossible to play by conventional means. That just leaves us with one final thing to talk about: the third live-action film released in 2013. Although the film was originally supposed to be called Riddick Rule the Dark, the title was ultimately shortened to just Riddick. The way this movie even got made is insane. Way back in 2004, after the second film was released, all potential interest from producers in the potential of the character or the franchise plummeted to the ground. So Vin Diesel saw an opportunity available to him. When the studio was doing the third Fast and Furious movie, Tokyo Drift, they asked Diesel to return for a cameo. He agreed to do it nearly for free, asking for the exclusive rights to the Riddick franchise in return instead of traditional payment. The studio agreed, given they did not intend to pursue the series any further, and figured it would save them the cash on the cameo. Shortly thereafter, Vin Diesel and David Twohy got to work on their exciting threequel. David Twohy is the writer and director of the first 2 movies, by the way, and has remained as attached to every installment of this franchise as Vin Diesel has, being credited in some capacity for anything Riddick and directly responsible for writing and directing all 3 live-action movies, plus contributing to the story of the animated one and the games. The story isn't done yet, however, because even with the rights in hand and a script ready by 2009, they still needed a studio to back them. Universal did agree once again to produce the third film, but the budget they got was shoestring. It was just barely larger than the first movie they'd done roughly 10 years prior. To put things into perspective, Pitch Black was developed with a budget of $23 million, which, okay, it was an original idea greenlit in the 90s technically, so that was a lot more back then, I'm sure. The sequel was boosted from 23 all the way up to $105 million for its budget, which is a significant amount more. That's like a modern comic book movie budget. The box office for the second movie barely made back its budget, and middling reviews caused the studios to shelf it before trading the rights to Diesel for a cameo. But then, for the third movie, the crew was able to secure themselves a budget of $38 million, which is more than the first one, but less than half the budget of the second one. It was so little in comparison to their hope for the movie, in fact, that Vin Diesel mortgaged his own home, took out several loans, and spent most of his personal money on fulfilling the rest of the needed budget so the film could be finished in full as he and David had envisioned. Fortunately, Riddick performed admirably at the box office and shattered expectations for home DVD and Blu-ray sales. The movie doubled its budget at the box office alone and kept grossing from there. It wasn't received quite as well as the original movie, but reception was kinder to this movie than the much maligned second film. Although many reviews were still exceedingly harsh, this actually instilled enough confidence in the studio to greenlight more Riddick properties, which we'll get to here shortly. Let's talk about the movie's plot. I watched the director's cut of the movie, which I'm led to understand has more than 8 additional minutes of content, most of which are just the exact events we see in the Blindsided motion comic. Vaco's conversation with Riddick, the assassination attempt, all of it is exactly the same as the motion comic, but was cut from the theatrical release. Basically, Riddick can tell he isn't welcome with the Necromongers, and he himself longs to see his homeworld called Furia. Vaco gives an underling the coordinates to the planet and has him take Riddick there. When they arrive, however, the planet isn't Furia. It's a backwater, desolate planet, not too dissimilar from the planet we see in the first film. In fact, this movie feels in a lot of ways like a sequel to the first film, and follows a lot of the same story beats as the first, but with a lot better execution. We watch as Riddick adapts to and survives on this planet, raises a local dog-like alien to be his companion, and hunts these serpent-like creatures that live in water. Eventually, he stumbles upon an old mercenary co-op compound and uses it to send a distress signal to some nearby mercs in hopes of using their ships to escape. What follows is, of course, a group of mercs lands and starts trying to catch Riddick before being picked off one by one. Then, shortly after that, another merc ship lands carrying a handful of significantly better equipped mercs, one of which is the father of John's, the merc Riddick killed in the first movie and has to deal with in Butcher Bay. It's a mercs versus Riddick situation, but there's strong tension between the two different merc groups, and it becomes clear John's dad doesn't even want the bounty. He wants answers from Riddick about his son. Katie Sackhoff is there too, playing the right-hand woman of John's dad, who I'm just going to call John's now for ease. Her character is weird. She's pretty butch and all but says outright she's a lesbian, but then the head of the other merc group tries to rape her, and it's implied Riddick saves her, but we don't actually see that happen. After that, though, she clearly likes Riddick, and then at the end of the movie, it's strongly implied she sleeps with Riddick, so I guess she was either lying about the lesbian part to keep the men off of her, or she was just that into Riddick. I couldn't really follow that part, but it's a really minor issue in an otherwise pretty spectacular movie. All of the insane plot contrivances are gone, and we're back to having a really tight-knit story. One really major difference is that Riddick's Gary Stu levels have been significantly reduced. He's a power fantasy, no doubt, but he actually takes a real beating in this movie, and has his foes get the upper hand on him on 3 separate occasions. This is the most we see Riddick lose, and the most pain we've seen him endure throughout the whole series. He really gets beat up, stabbed, tranquilized, and more. Before the movie's over, he pretty much loses. At the end of the film, Riddick is left in the rain to die the same way he almost was in the first film. But Johns comes back and saves him after hearing the truth that his son was a bad person and tried to sacrifice a child to save his own life in the first film. Johns comes to terms with this reality and keeps his word to Riddick, saving his life. All of the acting is great, the music is top-notch, the narrative is the strongest we've seen from the Riddick franchise, and the whole thing is just unequivocally badass. This is without a doubt the best of the Riddick films, leagues above the first 2 in my opinion. It's probably on par with Dark Fury, maybe not as good depending on your preference, but still really good. If this was the last we saw of Riddick, he would be going out on a high note, but we'll get to that in a second. If seeing this has raised a genuine interest in you about getting into this universe, then here's my official suggestions on how to go about it. Play Escape from Butcher Bay first, then Pitch Black, then Riddick Dark Fury. You can skip the second film and watch a recap, or you can just throw it on and enjoy its campiness, which is what I'd suggest. Play Assault on Dark Athena, then watch Riddick 2013, the director's cut. Everything else you can pass right by.
Gotta find that animal side again.
As of releasing this video, a fourth installment called Riddick Furia is confirmed to have a finalized screenplay and be in storyboarding pre-production. This film was confirmed to be in development all the way back in 2016, and I will say, it's very likely I'll consider seeing it in theaters. Even if you don't like the franchise, I feel like you have to at least respect the hard-headed dedication Diesel and Tui have demonstrated in keeping it going. Regardless of what we think of it, they love it, and that alone is actually enough to make me want to go see what they do next. The title makes me think they're going back to the more space operatic style of the second movie, but we'll see what happens with that. I'll probably make a follow-up video with my thoughts when it comes out if I go see it. One last thing I need to mention is that there is also a TV show in development set in the universe called Merc City. I have no idea anything about it beyond that it's being written by David Tui, same as the other entries, and that it'll be about the mercs and bounty hunters of the Riddick Universe. This is an interesting development actually, because it's the second TV show that's been developed for the Riddick Universe, the first being a series about Kira from the second film that was written and pitched to the Sci-Fi Channel back in 2004. That series never made it to production, so whether or not anything will come of this one, we'll have to wait and see. Speaking of the Sci-Fi Channel, some of you might be thinking to yourselves right now, "Gotcha, Evan, you missed one. The Sci-Fi Channel did a 44-minute TV special movie called Into Pitch Black. That takes place right before the first movie. Although probably not actually, because I'm betting none of you even know what that is. Well, just so you know, I didn't miss that one. I didn't mention it on purpose because not only is it totally non-canon, it's terrible. It's a cheap little TV special the Sci-Fi Channel threw together to air before premiering the real movie back in the year 2000. The story wasn't written by David Tui, and Vin Diesel's name is only on it because they used clips from the real movie. So it wasn't really worth mentioning. Well, that's everything. The entire Chronicles of Riddick series, right there. Now you're caught up. I'm gonna sum it up for you like this. The Chronicles of Riddick is a weird anti-media situation. It's that exception people are always talking about regarding the general rule. Because it's a series with phenomenal video game spin-offs of an otherwise decent at best movie franchise. But man, is it all made with love. Just because most of it isn't that great doesn't mean I can't appreciate it for being authentic to what the creators want. Thanks for joining me, everyone. I hope to see you in the next video, but until then, that's all I've got for you.
Put the sign, those of the gold.